So we come together before you on this day, March 30th, 2015, with one voice in unity, in the hopes that today will be another one of those moments in time, a moment that will forever change the course of music history. For today, we announce the launch of Tidal, the first ever artist-owned global music and entertainment platform.
The real change today is the fact that the music consumption will be driven by the demand and not only by the structure of the distribution. We invented 5% of what could be invented into music services. So the market driver in the coming 2 years at least will come from product innovation, will not from marketing tricks, will not come from commercial power, it will come from product innovation. So we have 60 curators on the ground who are listening 200 CDs per week to choose the best. We work with them and with the artist to identify how you can expand an artist. But my dream is not that next year we talk not about tech or distribution, but we talk how to make the artist to emerge, which we talk about music. I think that will show and prove the maturity of the market.
So linear TV, as we know it, will be as much of a relic in 20 years as the fixed line telephone.
My view, as I said before, is that I think over the next 5 years, almost every major product vertical is going to get rethought to be social. Get on the bus. The two that I'd focus on right now that I just really try to hammer home every day are move fast and be bold, right, and take risks. But the bottom line that we found was that you make something social, and that kind of rethinks the whole space. Right, a social version of anything can almost always be much more engaging and outperform a non-social version. I don't know, I think if anything, the Facebook story is a great example of how if you're building a product that people love, you can make a lot of mistakes.
Clearly, we're in the cable business, and that's the vast majority of what we do. And content's increasingly important to us. Content's incredibly important to our consumers. So I think we're all in the content business, whether we like to be or not. And
well, TV is one that we continue to have great interest in. So I choose my words carefully there. But, you know, TV is one of those things that, if we're really honest, it's stuck back in the 70s.
Think about this for a second, right? Data is the new oil. That's your money. All the data that people are sharing, producing, generating, is worth more money than oil was for a long time. We were, of course, in an oil-driven economy. Now we're in a data-driven economy. I think the money is in the data. Ask Google, right? $2.9 billion a month made with free stuff through data.
Minutes, if not sooner, in the aftermath of the earthquake and tsunami, the entire world knew about it and was communicating back to people in Japan. Not only were people in Japan communicating to each other, but the communication was global within seconds and minutes of the disaster. That's incredibly powerful and makes Twitter a super important communication lifeline after emergencies like this. So one of the things we're doing is working directly with the government of Japan to create this, we call it this Lifeline project, to enable Twitter to be a communications lifeline in cases of emergency like this, because it's the fastest and most efficient way to distribute your news of your personal situation as quickly as possible. And we're doing things like making sure there are lists of government agencies that are already on the platform that people can follow in cases of emergency, and making sure that the government agencies know which hashtags they're going to use to communicate things like where power is on and where it's out, when the railways are running and when they aren't, on and on and on, right? So instantaneously, in the event of a disaster, the government of Japan has a mechanism they can bring up on Twitter to communicate with people and allow those people to communicate with each other.
The scope and scale of video online is much larger than people appreciate. What is the content of the internet? Turns out it's video. What's the #1 source of video online? Netflix. Interesting. Now, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, is there any scenario where people will use the internet to watch the equivalent of movies? I'd say, you've got to be kidding. It's a terrible use of the internet. And I can give you a long list of reasons why I'm right. But the society has proven that I'm wrong.
I would answer very simply that the internet will disappear. The internet there'll be so many IP addresses because of IPv6, so many devices, sensors, things that you're wearing, things that you're interacting with, that you won't even sense it. It'll be part of your presence all the time.
The way to think about search is to think that search is imperfect because it gives you a lot of choices. We would like to be able to give you the one answer that's correct. And so and again, you have to opt in, and this is all voluntary and all that kind of stuff, the more information that you tell us about yourself, the more accurate the result can be. The next generation of search will be much more targeted at you, and in fact, we may be able to get to the point where we suggest what you should be searching for. And so let's look at Apple and Google, for example. Think of these as two countries, right? So in the old high-tech way, one would dominate the other one would disappear fairly quickly. But it's much more likely that each country, which has its own religion and its own incompatible view of the other, is going to have to put up with the other.
Do you think there'll be a magical journalism device that will make all of us at The Economist redundant, and you will produce the Google version of The Economist make?
What's interesting about technology is that we do a pretty good job of catching up to the basics. And we don't do a very good job of genius, right? So if you take a look at Google News, many of you use Google News, it does a pretty good job of assembling the obvious stuff, but it doesn't have a lot of insight. So the role of journalists, in my view, is going to be the role of insight, and it's going to be a long time. So here's an example. We had a project inside of Google to write things, and I suggested, by the way, that you could have it write a paper, and then you could have it recursively add 7%. And then you could add another 7%. So it would produce infinitely long papers. And what it did is it sort of looked mechanically at all this information and assembled it based on these things. And it did a pretty good job of a bad author. But if you read it and you have a good author, you can see the difference. That's, I think, where we are. It may be that 50 years from now, the systems will be so powerful that they can replicate the kind of special insight that journalists and reporters and people who are practitioners have. But it'll be a long time.
Well, in the last couple of hours, it's gone to the #1 podcast in the UK. Good news for Dana Chivis, who's one of the producers on Serial, who joins us from New York. Dana, why is this such a phenomenon, do you think?
Well, I think this is a tried and true kind of format. True crime stories have that natural narrative tension to them that people are very interested in. But also, we're reporting and producing this story as we're going along making each episode. And so there's that tension added too. There's the tension of us doing the story each week, and I think the audience is also picking up on that.
Do you think it's a modern way of doing things or a traditional one? Which is it? Or is it the best of both traditions?
It's definitely the best of both traditions. It's modern in that it's a podcast. We're not on the radio, actually. We're podcast only. But this is one of the oldest sort of forms of storytelling.
What I hope is that we can take this technological shift and move it from not just being about listening to music to being about even how we create music. If we can contribute to providing a platform for musicians to be more creative and even move what actually music means to people, that's something that, for me would be the holy grail to try to figure out. So that's one of those problems that I'd like to tackle, and that's the musician in me trying to just see how can we impact culture.
Radio is still the pipeline to music for most people. 80% of the hours Americans spend with music spent listening to radio. Only 20% is spent listening to stuff that you own, and including all these new subscription services, on-demand services. It's primarily, a radio industry. So the chance to disrupt that is really exciting. And now what's happened as we've grown so much is Pandora's actually is now a pretty substantial part of radio. We're about 8% of all the radio listening hours in the US. An exciting time to be, in this business, and I think broadcast radio is not very well prepared for it. So our ambition is, to have a substantial share of this industry. Broadcast radio is where the hours are, so that's who we're going after. 90% of radio listening still happens on AM/FM, so that's where our growth is going to come from.